In the 18th century, a series of crimes shook Portuguese society. A 22-year-old young woman is said to have killed dozens of orphaned babies left at the Foundling wheel in Coimbra. And she is said to have done all this in the most brutal ways possible, becoming the last woman sentenced to death in an investigation that shocked Portugal. But why did she do all this? What flaws in the Foundling wheel system did she exploit? What mistake led to her being discovered and, as a legal detail, almost allowed her to escape the death penalty? In today's video, we're going to talk about Luisa de Jesus, the monster of the Foundling wheel, and the series of crimes that shocked Portugal. But before we start the video, if you enjoy our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way, you'll have access to our group and exclusive content, including live classes to dive even deeper into the behind the scenes of history. Luisa de Jesus was born in 1748, the daughter of Manuel Ruiz and Mariana Ruiz, who were first cousins. At that time, people of low social status often didn't give their children the same last name, since the law didn't require it. And so Luisa, despite the last name Ruiz, was called only Jesus. She worked as a carrier, which was a person who delivered packages and messages between different cities and locations. And Luisa's profession would put her above any suspicion for the acts she would commit. Living as a poor and young person from Coimbra, she discovers an easy and bizarre way to make money: the Foundling wheel. This wheel, which appeared in the Middle Ages, became hugely popular in Portugal as a way to combat infanticide, and it was always attached to some holy houses of mercy. Whenever a child was born from an extramarital or illicit relationship, it was often difficult for a woman to always keep the child from that relationship with her, because it constantly reminded me of betrayal, or even when the woman became a widow and couldn't provide for the baby on her own. Thus, the natural fate of these children was the Foundling wheel. In this wheel, the child could be placed and the wheel would be turned, ringing a bell right after, so that the child would be taken in by the religious brotherhood inside. Thus, instead of mothers abandoning their children in public squares, in the middle of the night exposing them to cold and death, this mechanism ensured secrecy and a greater chance of survival for the child, thus saving millions of lives. But what Luisa was really after were the pensions that came with each abandoned child. King Pedro II, seeking to boost rota adoptions, chose to allocate resources to support families adopting rejected children. So for each orphan that was adopted, the person would receive 600 reis, a crib, and 66 centimeters of fluffy wool fabric. It wasn't much money, but not little either. 600 reis was equivalent, for example, to 40% of a month's salary for a kitchen maid at the Royal Hospital. Luisa saw this as an opportunity to earn a living. In this way, the young Luisa went to the wheel for several days to collect babies. And since she worked as a carrier, she said she was going to deliver them to other families. But in reality, she killed them, keeping 600 reis and selling the fluffy wool and the cradle in other places. Luisa walked past the Coimbra Foundling wheel many times. And one day she raised a lot of suspicion when she asked to take 2 children at once. But since she was already known by the staff, it was granted. No one saw the babies Luisa took again, and no one suspected anything until the ground began to speak. An employee named Angelica Maria, while walking through Monte Arroyo, which was near the Santa Casa, ended up stumbling over the body of a baby found in a shallow grave. And since the child hadn't died long ago, she recognized that the baby was one of those given to Luisa and that there was still a knot tied around its neck. That's when the investigations began. Records show 34 babies were given to the same woman. And after they started digging at the site, they found 15 bodies of orphaned babies buried in that mound. Luisa was soon arrested and confessed to killing some of the babies. but not all of the ones she had taken. That's when the judge, not believing what she said, ordered an investigation at Luisa's house. And there, what they found ended up shocking the whole country. At Luisa's house, they found clay pots containing a large number of small limbs stored inside. Luisa kept her victims' limbs in clay pots in her house and under some straw, and the heads in turn were found nearby and buried around the house. And, due to the more advanced state of decomposition compared to the bodies from Monte Arroyo, it is indicated that Luisa's first victims were those dismembered and buried near her house. But when she started doing this more habitually and consistently over time, she became less cautious. She started suffocating them and burying them in shallow graves, even near the location of the wheel, so she could enjoy the money as soon as possible. Luisa, in this way, valued cost-effectiveness. If before she killed her victims, at home and with a long process little by little, got rid of them as quickly as possible, and right there, causing Angelica Maria to literally stumble upon a baby's shallow grave. And Luisa's haste and confidence reached the point where she asked for 2 orphans at the same time. 2 employees of the Santa Casa, named Margarita Joaquina and Leocadia Maria da Conchecao, who handed the children over to Luisa, were arrested for criminal omission. Luisa said she would take the babies to couples who in reality never received them. And what's more, some of them didn't even exist, with her even making up names when she started to feel more comfortable and gained more confidence. And so, the employees were arrested in one of the first cases of imprisonment for criminal omission of this nature in Portugal. However, when the situation was verified and it was found that the employees had no connection with the criminal and were not even aware of what had happened, they were released from prison. Meanwhile, Luisa was facing execution. Luisa's defense, however, had an ace up their sleeve, claiming that she was underage since the age of criminal responsibility for women was only 25 years old. Thus, legally, she could not be sentenced to death, but this was not taken into consideration by the court. Considering the cruel nature of the deaths, the habitual behavior and the coldness of the perpetrator, the court understood that she carried out actions of a monstrous and deliberate nature, the opposite of any innocence associated with being a minor. And so the verdict was given. Luisa was sentenced to death and public humiliation. She would not only be killed but also displayed as a monster first. Luisa had to walk through the streets of Lisbon in disgrace, with a man announcing her crimes while she was tortured, that is, branded with a hot iron. Taken to the gallows, her hands were cut off and then she was strangled to death. That's because her victims had been suffocated with cloths. So, they decided it was best for her to die in the same way. And finally, as the sentence says, her body was burned and reduced to ashes so that there would never again be any memory of such a monster. She was killed on July 1, 1772 at the age of 22. Luisa was the last woman executed by the death penalty in Portugal. After her, there was another woman sentenced for lèse-majesté. Isabel de Rochas Lemos aided the French during Portugal's invasion but escaped before execution. Luisa's case was emblematic in the history of Portugal. After her, much stricter rules were created to monitor the fate of those who were rejected. 11 years later, Dona Maria I established her own authorities to oversee orphans. The wheel of the rejected would become an instrument that would save thousands of lives attached to the holy houses. And later, other places in Europe would start adopting the same system. But the example of Luisa served to increase the oversight over the families of those who received the little ones. That's because sometimes evil isn't stereotyped in an ugly and withered person. Sometimes a beautiful and young face can hide a real monster. And did you know the story of the wheel murderess? What surprised you the most? So go ahead and leave a comment now to support our work. And take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.